What's the most terrifying we need to leave now moment you've ever experienced? Story 1 year back. I was walking into a bank. As I pushed on the door, I locked eyes with a teller inside. She was looking at me, shaking her head no. I then saw a person with a gun was robbing the place. I quickly backed up, ran to my car, and called 911. Someone may have in my pants. Not sure who, though. Story 2, hiking in the mountains. Sun was setting, and we heard this low, guttural growl that just vibrated through the trees. No idea what it was, but the hair on my neck stood up, and we booked it down that trail faster than I thought possible. Felt like something was hunting us, and it wasn't friendly. Story January 3rd, 1979 or on. I'm 9 years old. My mom is a low-level diplomat. She comes home from work and says, "We have 90 minutes to get to the airport to get out of the country." She knew the Shah's family was getting on a plane and that the overthrow of the government was days, if not hours away. We got on the cargo plane with one suitcase between the four of us and maybe 500. Sure enough, next day was the overthrow and lots of people were killed or executed. That's how I wound up in the United States. Story 4, I was in Curitiba, Brazil, at a communist-themed bar called Fidel. The bartender was wearing a Che Guevara hat and sort of had that look. I was with like 4 other Americans. After a while, the bar emptied out. We were the only ones in there aside from the bartender. Suddenly, the bartender went over to the door, locked it, and closed a metal shutter over it. So we were trapped inside. He looked at us and pointed to a stairwell and said upstairs now. We were all freaked out, but figured better do what he says because he seemed serious. We went upstairs to this small room with chairs and a coffee table, thinking he was going to rob us or kill us or something, and I was looking for a window or some way to get out. We wait there in tense silence for a few minutes. Then he comes upstairs with a huge bomb. Explains he closed the shutter because one of the customers in the bar previously had harassed tourists and had pulled a knife on someone the other day and tends to linger around drunk outside the bar. He suggested we wait upstairs for 30 minutes or so until the guy had stumbled home. Then he smoked us out on his huge bong, and we had a laugh before going back to the hostel. Story 5, I was out on a run, and I noticed this old woman, probably 60 to 70, sitting on the curb. She waved me down, and so I ran over to her. She needed help getting up, but as we were talking, I just got this feeling in my gut that something was off. I felt really horrible abandoning an older woman who claimed to need help, but I couldn't shake that feeling, so I apologized for not being able to help and ran off. I looked back just a few seconds later, and this dude in a black truck pulls up to her, and she gets up and gets a no problem. I probably broke a PR. I ran home so fast. Maybe I was just a paranoid female teenager, but to this day, 15 years later, I still get chills thinking about it, and feel like it may have been a ploy to try to kidnap me. I was training for a marathon and ran that route a lot, so they could have been expecting me. Story 6, 2 a.m. or so, driving in an unlit road. There was a guy laying on the road perpendicular to the road. The person driving slowed down and started to take off his seatbelt to move the person off the road. Something fell off, so I told him not to stop and drive around. The body wasn't there anymore on the way back. Could have just been a drunk guy. Or it could have been a trap, we'll never know. Story 7, I flew into a smaller terminal at the Cancun International Airport with 2 friends, an American and their European nationals. After passport control, a Border Patrol agent says they have a taxi waiting if would like to take it. I decline, saying I'd rather take the shuttle to the main airport, but my 2 friends tell me I'm being paranoid and get into the car. It was locked from the inside, but luckily the Mexican police show up before the car starts driving. They tell us it's an illegal taxi, and they offer to give us a ride to our hotel instead. Before my friends can answer, I say thanks, but no thanks, and we finally take the shuttle, called a real taxi, and made it to our hotel safely. It was one of the few times being a paranoid American really worked out. Story 8 was part of a wilderness camping trip as a kid with counselors in the mountains. We had just set up camp when all of a sudden people from higher up were fleeing down, and everyone was in a panic. There was a forest fire rapidly descending down towards us. The counselors basically threw what they could back in the vans and wrangled up 15 kids and got us out. We ended up at some random restaurant. As an adult, I think about how terrifying it must have been for those young counselors responsible for a bunch of 10-year-olds' lives to get us to safety. Story 9, the Seoul Halloween crowd crush in 2022. I was there with my friends, surrounded by dead people. It took us about 5 hours to leave the scene. I still can't get over it. R.I.P. to the victims. Story 10, driving in Mexico, north of Monterrey. I was in a big Suburban and suddenly feel this bump from behind. Look over to see a taxi with 2 guys in the front. They were waving for me to pull over. I noticed there was no back seat. I immediately thought nope. Not pulling over to end robbed, raped, and shot in the desert. I floored it and left them behind. Story 11 won't be as bad as some, but was driving in remote Cambridgeshire Fens, 40-ish miles of terrible roads. Sun was going down, and we pulled into a Dodge flat-roof pub to use the bathroom. Went in, the bar was completely full of blokes silently watching the TV. Not one of them moved, said anything, or acknowledged me in any way. Not even the barman. Got to the bathroom. Light wasn't working, had it in the pitch black, blokes were in the same positions when I got out. Got back in the car, my GF said she needed the loo, too. Told her to put her seatbelt back on, because we were leaving now before we're burning the Wicker Man. I know it sounds silly, I just didn't want to be there when the sun went down. Drove like the clappers until I reached the motorway. Then we pulled over again, not sure why, but one of the creepiest and most unnerving experiences I've had. Something just told me to scarp her. Story 12, I was at an outdoor music festival as a teen, in the heat of summer. With a delay in the setup of the next band, we were in the middle of the crowd, and the energy was becoming very tense. People started throwing flattened water bottles across the crowd, and at the stage hands that were moving as fast as they could to fix whatever the issue was. By the time the pre-show music started, the crowd began to sway involuntarily from pushing from the back. We agreed it was time to go, but then the band came on as we were trying to move sideways out of the crowd, and everyone rushed forward. A 300-pound dude fell on my friends and I, and it took 5 men to get him off us while others around us were trying to hold back the rush. Once we were up and moving again, a mosh pit broke out around us. I will never forget the 65 with a red mohawk that saw our trouble and shouted the only way out is up and offered us his laced hands for us to take a step as he tossed us up to crowd surf out. I almost lost my shoe while crowd surfing, but we made it out safely and hung back for the rest of the shows. God save the punks. Story 13, I was 8 at a restaurant with my cousins, mom, and aunt, also the same age as us kids at the time, 8 to 12. We were celebrating birthdays. This was a hole-in-the-wall restaurant. 2 guys came in acting suspicious. They kept looking over at our table. We were the only ones there other than the 2 people working. One kept feeling around his pocket. The one guy was very, very nervous. He went outside and threw up. After a little while, his partner went out and seemed to be trying to talk him into going back in, but he wouldn't. The partner came back in by himself for a while, but eventually left without ordering anything. My mom was on alert and was telling us 4 kids to get up now and leave, which is what I think prompted the guys to leave. I knew as a kid something was very wrong. As an adult, I 100% believe it was a planned armed robbery, but the one guy had second thoughts seeing a mom with 4 cute little girls there. If they're out there, thanks for not traumatizing us. This was 30 years ago. Story 14, not terribly terrifying, but led a group of students boarding school to a roller skating rink. We pull up, and there's a KFC next door. Kids always want fast food, so I said okay, they'll get a Coke, and then go to the rink. When I got to the register, the cashier said, "Those seem like nice kids, always nice to hear that they're being polite." I say something like, "Thanks, yeah, they're nice kids." She replies, "You probably don't want to be here after 9. Thankfully, the kids figured out that a metal detector or roller skating rink is a good indication we don't want to stay long. We were gone at 8:15. Story 15, I was staying at a roadhouse in the Avenue of the Giants. The roadhouse had an attached bar and restaurant, and the locals were talking about possible mountain lions in that area. Early next morning, I drove a few miles north, stretched, and set out for my run. A few yards down, I heard what could be described as a child wailing. In the complete silence of the pre-dawn, the sound was horrifying. I have never run faster in my life to my car. Story 16, heard shooting while on a walk on a park. Something about being in a group of people running in desperation really makes you feel like prey, and your primal instincts just take over. Story 17, not a leave now moment, but a think quick moment for sure. I lived in a small condo gated in Santa Monica in the 90s. I was in my room back bedroom folding clothes and heard a knock that sounded like it was at my neighbor's. Another knock, and I felt like I needed to go check. I walked into the living room just as my front door was opening and a young man was stepping into my place. My reaction wasn't fear, it was anger. I screamed, "Who the F are you, and what the F are you doing here?" He mumbled something about being a college student, and I moved towards him and told him to get the F out. He ran away. The West Side rapist was on the loose back then, and it wasn't until after that I thought about that. I called the police and reported it. Turns out that's who came to my door. He was captured shortly after that. That was a lesson I'll never forget. Fight back. I was prepared to take him on physically if he hadn't left. Story 18, I absent-mindedly got on an empty subway car and realized that the doors closed, that it was empty. Everyone in the next car was pressed up against the window, watching me, and see the overwhelming smell that I had just chalked up to summer in NYC was coming from a naked man at the other end of the car who had covered himself and most of the seat, floor, and window near him with. He seemed to be squaring up. I turned and tried the door between the cars, but it was locked. The people staring at me tried theirs, also locked. They gave me sympathetic looks as the train started moving. Dude slipped and fell with a wet thud, and he howled. I was uncomfortable. Story 19, not as ominous as the rest. but I was in a pet store killing time before an appointment. Suddenly, I was filled with dread. As an anxious person, this isn't totally usual, so I initially tried to talk myself out of it for a minute or two, which of course felt like forever. I was so uncomfortable that I thought, screw it, I don't need to be here, and went down the aisle to the side of the store to loop around back to the front door in the center. As soon as I got to the side of the aisle, a BMW SUV came crashing through the glass windows, knocking over the aisles straight into the cash register. It would have hit me dead on. Astoundingly, no one was injured. The driver hit the gas by mistake. She was horribly upset. I walked in a bit of a daze. Still creeps me out as I'm typing, actually. Story: 20 European tourist in New York took a taxi to the wrong neighborhood without knowing. When we got out of the taxi, there was a group of men sitting on a staircase in front of a house. They noticed us and immediately started nodding their heads like, nope, you're at the wrong place, so we left immediately. Story 21 Shooting in the parking lot of mall. Everyone bum rushed in the opposite direction, which for me and about 24 people was inside an Apple store. We all ran into the closet of the store until we got the all clear. Apparently, it was a couple of idiots fighting over a parking space and not some mass shooter. It was scary, though. Story 22M from Kiev, Ukraine, February 24th, 2022. My parents wake me up at night, and the first thing I hear is pack up. The Russians are already here. We expected them attacking, but we didn't expect them to get to Kiev in a single night, which was only possible because they launched this attack from Belarus. After a few seconds of horror, an adrenaline rush had followed. I barely remember anything that happened that day, or the following 5 or 7 days that we were on a bus to the Polish border. Story 23 Me and my mom were homeless and lived in and out of our car for a while, which, believe it or not, has downsides. We try to park in nicer areas, but not so nice you stick out. One night, 2 dudes started banging on the windows and yelling what sounded like German. We live in Mass, USA. You never really slept when you were sleeping in a car, kind of just this half sleep, so Mom instantly woke up, turned the key, and we left. She made peace with my grandpa after that, and we stayed with him, thank God. So all throw scary. Thank you, darkly dressed, possibly German carjacker dudes. Story 24 I was in a store with a friend. I was looking at the aisle with my back towards most of the store. I felt a presence coming up behind me, so I turned around really fast and met with the guy right up in my face, crouched a little, his hand stretched toward my waist. He either tried to grab my wallet. But when I turned around, we locked eyes. He quickly went to another aisle, and I stood there for a second wondering what almost happened. When I looked up again, he was staring straight at me from across the store with just his eyes, eyebrows, and forehead visible from over the aisle shelves. It was the scariest look. His eyes looked enraged. My friend didn't notice that anything happened, but when I saw him glaring at me like that, I told her immediately, we need to go. She didn't ask questions and we left. I didn't report it, but I wish I would have. I was scared and just wanted to leave. Another time I was walking down the street and I saw a guy started following me. I tried to take a different route home until he stopped, but he followed me across 3 streets and into an apartment complex. I got lost inside the apartment complex. I somehow ended up in a fenced courtyard that I couldn't find the way out of, and he was still following me. I had to climb up an embankment to get out. I could not wait to get home. Also, I unknowingly got in the car of a driver who was on coke and extremely agitated. You can guess how that ride went. Okay, last one, I promise. I was very young, maybe 7 or 8. I was playing outside in my cul-de-sac with some neighbor kids around the same age as me. All of us were girls. This huge maroon van pulls into the cul-de-sac with the window rolled down. He pulls up slowly to where my friends and I were playing on the sidewalk. He tells me, I need to go to the hospital. Do you know where it is at? Can you take me to the hospital? I told him I didn't know where it was. We all ran inside right after. Story 25 Me and a friend were playing along a river bend in Michigan after a modest rain. The river curved at this spot and carved into the sandy hillside, and the sand made this really nice, almost beach-like cove. So we were sitting there playing, making sand castles and such, and we hear this series of snaps and look up, and the trees on the hilltop are just sort of shivering. We both just sort of panic-bolted, not even understanding why, and about 5 seconds later the entire hilltop just sort of liquefied and slushed down over the bank and into the river. I'm talking like maybe a 40 by 100-foot area, trees, and all just collapsed. Story 26 wasn't so much as we, but me. I was early elementary waiting for the school bus in my driveway. I lived in the country, so they picked you up at your house, and I always waited halfway down my long driveway until I saw the bus crest the top of the hill. While I was waiting, that classic pedo, windowless, unmarked utility van pulls into the bottom of my driveway. A man pops his head out the window and waves at me and says he lost and needs directions. I instantly get that bad feeling about the guy and start slowly backing on my driveway, shaking my head no at him. He says he can't hear me and asked me to come closer. I refused and kept backing up the driveway. My mom saw this from the kitchen window and came out to see what was going on, and he backed out and left. Not long after that, a girl was grabbed by a man in a van that matched the description of the one that stopped in my driveway. Thankfully, she wiggled out of her backpack and got away, but I don't think they ever found the guy. Story 27, not terrifying, rather lucky. I heard a house party after a local concert. It was at my friend's house who was under 21. I was just over 21. I figured there would be more people my age because of who attended the concert. I showed up with a case of beer and realized I was the only of-age person there. I said, "Y'all keep the beer out." As I was leaving, just out of the driveway and on the street, I saw two cop cars coming up with their lights off to bust the party. Story 28, my dad had just gotten out of jail and had a deep, deep hatred for my mother. His only goal was to murder her, and he was on a serial killer movie, unstoppable kind of bender, due to 2 days of freedom, aka 2 days of meth use. We were notified of my father's release 2 days before, so my mom packed her and moved in with me. Now, this is before security cameras and smartphones, so anyways, my mom worked nights. She clocks out at midnight and proceeds to drive to my apartment. Unbeknownst to her, my father had stolen a car and hid outside of her work. He discreetly followed her to my apartment building and laid in wait. Well, morning comes, and my mom realizes she's locked her keys in her car, so she calls AAA, and they come unlock the car for free. My father is still watching from up the street in a stolen car, so my mom thanks the man and goes back in. From the street to my apartment complex is a rather long walk, and my complex was not gated. So he gets out and sneaks his way around so as to not be seen by my mother. He watches her go up the flights of stairs. He knocks on my door and says, "Ma'am, it's AAA. I forgot to have you sign the invoice." My mom innocently opens the door and barely gets it open 1 inch before he forces his way in. There's a one-sided struggle. Lots of physical and violence. Then they leave in my mom's car. The above paragraph was told by my mother to me and the cops. I obviously wasn't there. So anyways, I get home after my shift and see there's been a struggle. There's blood, broken picture frames used as a weapon, and some of my stuff missing. I knew in my heart of hearts that somehow he found her. My heart sank down to my feet. What made things even worse was the fact that Los Angeles Police Department wouldn't do anything. This isn't an isolated incident. Every time he gets out of jail, it's straight for us, and LAPD knows it. But they don't give a... So I knew it was solely up to me to find her. The day I got the letter he was getting out. She came over, and we made a contingency plan. My father was a homeless drug addict. He had no friends or family besides us. He would do anything for $1. We knew we could buy some time with him if we say something along the lines of, "Okay, I buried some money in case of emergency. It's a lot. It'll take a go-get if you let me go." My dad's thought process is more money, more meth. So sure enough for my mom, since I wasn't there, once in her car, he falls for our plan. LA has a huge park called Griffith Park, and my mom and I used to go hiking on this trail. So our scheme was to tell him the money's buried in a can by a certain tree. So they drive there and start walking. It's a Tuesday at 12:15 p.m. The particular trail is not very busy. I show up, and sure enough, I see my mom's car parked at the trailhead. I knew she was alive, and I was going to rescue her. The sheer terror and panic in my heart and soul had been replaced with hope. After a short hike, I come upon both of them on their hands and knees digging in the dirt just off the trail. Neither sees me as I make a point to be super quiet. With my dad down on all fours, I jumped on his back and we wrestled a bit. My mom took off screaming toward the parking lot. I eventually reached a leverage position where I was able to choke him unconscious. Or so I thought. I threw his limp body down and turned to run after Mom, but he sprung back up quickly and a chase ensued. He talked me after a few steps. We're going blow for blow now, Mom nowhere to be seen. I end up beating him to a pulp, to the point where I broke a bone in my left hand and my right wrist. He's alive, but bad, and hope he gets the message. I leave him there and make it back to Mom. She's waiting by my truck crying. Dad has her keys, so we get in my truck. He's straight for the nearest police station, and the rest is history. He gets picked up 2 days later sleeping at a random park. After one night in county hospital, he's sent to county jail. The judicial process is very slow in Los Angeles County. A few months later is his trial. Mother and I testify. The police testify. My father sent away for a decade. He died a few days after he was released, drug overdose in the same parking lot of the trail in Griffith Park. The world is a better place with him dead and married now. Mom has grandkids and a daughter-in-law. There's lots of love in my life. Replaced all the darkness, LAPD. I was longboarding back home after being at a friend's. It was like 3 a.m., and I was slightly drunk in the middle of my city, longboarding my way peacefully. I saw 4 guys walking together in front of me coming my way, and spreading to, I assume, let me go through like 2 on each side of the street. Before I have time to think, I'm passing the first guy, who hits me in the back of the neck with a telescopic baton. I never went that fast in my life. I guess they were surprised I didn't fall. They threw few glass bottles at me and ran after me, but I was luckily faster. I had a huge bruise on my neck for a few weeks. Don't want to know what would have happened if they got a hold of me. Story 29, I was in China, and me and a bud were walking late in a pretty heavily trafficked part of the city. There was this guy handing out girl cards, which are like little business cards for brothels, as well as scams where they'll beat you up for your money. We ignored him. Then I hear him on the phone line a second later. Get over here quick. I heard that and noticed the usual police presence had left, so I turned to my friend who didn't speak Chinese and told him we had to get out of there. We turned back around and grabbed a taxi at the street we just crossed and got the out of Dodge. Edit forgot to add this detail that I later learned he was a part of one of the beat 'em up scams and always had a watermelon knife on him, think machete, but like 75 the size. Story 30, lived in Maine. Went into the grocery store for a few items and saw this very off-looking individual walk down the ice cream aisle where I got an insanely weird and panic feeling and told my girlfriend that we needed to leave immediately. It made no sense at all, but we quickly went through self-checkout and left. 5 minutes later this happened. Story 31, I was living in Europe and was walking down the street at night. Not very late, maybe 8 p.m., with my at the time, he was talking rather loudly and clearly in American English. A guy walking down the street ahead perpendicular to us looked over at us and kept eyeing us. He had something baton-like in hand and was swinging around by his side a bit. I quietly told him to shut up, but of course he still loudly asked why. I said that guy's giving me seriously bad vibes, and he brushed me off. We turned down the same street that guy was walking on because I insisted on picking up some food, and it was the only street with restaurants still open. I made us walk on the far side of the street. Sure enough, that guy had stopped and was waiting in the shadows. When he saw us, he started following us. We went to the restaurant, and he followed us in there too, and went and sat at a table without ordering. By then, I believed me, but insisted on still getting his food. I could see at that time the guy was carrying an umbrella. But the way he was holding it suggested he intended to not use it for rain. It wasn't raining that evening, even. We got my food to go and left, and of course the guy followed us. Luckily, a large group of people came out of a bar club a couple doors down, so I grabbed my hand and wormed us in the middle of them, and then dashed down a small cut-through street, and we ran to get around the curve, so we couldn't be seen. Thankfully, we lost the guy at that point, but I have no doubt we were very close to getting jumped, beaten, and robbed, and I've since dropped the dead weight that X was. Story 32, encountered a pedophile while playing on the playground when I was about 9. This being the 80s and me being the oldest, I had to round up my 2 younger siblings and convince them we really needed to get home. Without alerting the guy that we thought he was a weirdo, my mom called the cops when we got home, and they caught the dude. We had to go to the station and ID him and everything. Story 33, when I was 11. We were at the beach, and the day was good, but not exactly sunny. There was a rain forecast, but only for later in the day. Far away in the horizon, I saw a black line in the sky. I counted a few minutes and looked again. The black line was now a thick black bar. A couple minutes later, it was the darkest storm cloud I've ever seen. I went to my parents and said, "We need to leave now," line, and pointed at the cloud. Right when I pointed, we could see the flashes of lightning in the black cloud. We barely had time to drive and stop under a bridge when the town was hit with, according to the radio, 80 miles per hour winds and hail the size of eggs. Storm didn't last 10 minutes. And the sun was back. I felt bad for the people at the beach. The hospital was so packed with people in need of first aid for cuts and bruises that they installed a tent in front of the hospital for the smaller injuries. Story 34, my mom and I were in Dubai in the middle of the night. This guy on a corner stopped my mom and started trying to sell her a purse for cheap. I don't know why she agreed to be polite. He said to follow him and led us through dark deserted alley after dark deserted alley. The whole time, my 15F at the time was tugging on my mom's sleeve, telling her we need to go. We need to go. Stop following him. This is creepy. I wasn't about to leave my mom, but in hindsight, if I had, she probably would have followed me. But she was saying it would be rude to leave. Finally, he led us to the back entrance of an unmarked building and started up the dimly lit stairs, and I absolutely refused to let go of my mom's arm or let her take another step. Thank God her common sense finally kicked in, and from outside, she said no thank you, and we fast walked the out of there. And to think this woman was a refugee. How she survived all those years, I'll never know. Story 35, beginning of the war in Ukraine. Specifically, when I've heard the far-off explosions and could hear how the windows were tremoring because of them, then the declaration of war on the news. Never in my life have I went with my family to somewhere else that fast. Story 36, this happened to me last weekend. I was driving home from work at 3 a.m. and needed some gas. I pull into this gas station that's closed but pumps are on, and immediately see a car pull in for the other side of the gas station. They slow roll by me. I look in their car, and they're both staring me down. They stopped at one of the pumps, and I'm like, nope. And I leave without gassing up. I think my gut was right, because as soon as I started driving, those guys just drove off. They were not there to get gas. Story 37. There were a few growing up. Two friends and I were exploring a nearby mountain, and we noticed what looked like a large animal den at the base of a huge pine tree. It was early spring, so we could see there were human footprints in the snow leading up to the den. We assumed it was just someone else checking out the hole. We walked within 30 feet or so, and this guy dives out of the hole in a dead run, carrying a shovel and screaming at us. We took off running and telling our fat friend to hurry up, or he's going to get deliverance. The crazy guy eventually gave up. One of the friends said they saw him outside their house later, though, but who knows? There was also the time in 3rd or 4th grade when a kid tried to bring a loaded .30-06 on the bus to shoot some of us. The bus driver shoved him out of the bus and stood in the doorway blocking him out. He aimed right at her face several times, but she didn't budge. They had their verbal standoff till police arrived. He ran off into the woods with his rifle, and we went to school. He ended up going to juvenile hall till I saw him again around 8th grade. Story 38 was in a busy public square in France, and a car drove by, slowed down, and someone threw something out of the window that landed with a metallic plink sound about 20 feet from me. Lady sitting on a bench next to where it landed jumped when she saw it. It was a small propane cylinder wrapped in duct tape. I picked up my kid and ran. It didn't blow up, and police who arrived a few minutes later didn't make a big fuss, but it sure as looked like an IED to me. Story 39, when my friend was groped in the woman's bathroom in Juarez, Mexico border to El Paso, and a friend grabbed the guy and beat him up. When the doorman saw what we did, he went white and immediately told us to run back to bridge the crossing point to U.S. We had beat up a notorious gang member, and he knew we'd be killed if we got found. Story 40, when I was young, I was in a school shooting. It was announced over the intercom that there was an active threat in the school, but for a reason I can't remember, my teacher at the time thought it was just a drill. So we remained in our seats and continued working on our assignments. I remember just starting down at the page, unable to move, and I just knew it wasn't just a drill. There weren't any sounds of shots fired yet, or screams, but my body was reacting with such fear that I knew. By the time that my teacher eventually realized it wasn't a drill, I was already debating on running out the classroom door, since we were very close to the school's entrance, where I could have gotten out. Obviously, that wasn't the best idea, and I didn't do it, but the gut feeling I had in that moment was crazy. Edit coming back to this, the gut feeling could have been attributed to the fact that my brother was in danger and later died during the shooting, sibling bond, and all that, I guess. Story 41, when my house caught fire, my son was still in bed, asleep, and I had to almost drag him out. Huge relief when fire rescue arrived. We were all safe, though, some damage to the house, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. Story 42, 4th of July, out in the wilderness. Me and my ex-GF figured we'd sit at the base of the foothills and take in the town fireworks, picnic style, the whole 9 yards. We're sitting there around dusk with no one around. And then I look about 125 meters away and saw that something was in the tall grass with its head popped up. It looked like a mountain cat at the distance. I didn't think too much of it. Thought my mind was just playing tricks on me, so I looked away. A minute or two later, I looked back over in a general direction, and this cat is a little more defined and making a direct line for us. I asked the ex-GF if she sees what I see, and she says, "Oh my God, that a mountain lion." We didn't wait to ask questions. We noped the F out of there.